As Mike Tyson's 10-year-old son, Jaden, stood outside a store, the energy of Brooklyn pulsed around him. The hustle and bustle of the streets were a constant hum, but suddenly, everything shifted. A racist cop, Officer Connors, approached and, without warning, grabbed Jaden. He mocked him cruelly, humiliating the boy in front of a gathering crowd. Jaden, caught off guard and terrified, could do nothing but hang there helplessly as the officer's taunting laughter echoed around him. But then, the air changed. The rumble of a powerful engine roared in the distance, and the crowd fell silent. Mike Tyson had arrived. The noise of the city seemed to vanish as the crowd's attention snapped toward him. Tyson's eyes locked onto the officer, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The crowd held its collective breath, knowing something big was coming. Officer Connors, still smirking, refused to back down. Big mistake. In an instant, Tyson's fists exploded with ferocious power. The impact shook the ground beneath them as Tyson delivered brutal justice, swift, unforgiving, and relentless. The cop would never forget this lesson. The streets hummed with life. Car horns blared, their insistent melodies cutting through the air. Food vendors called out their specials, trying to grab the attention of passers-by, while pedestrians moved like a river through the urban maze. Their footsteps synced with the heartbeat of the city, a chaotic symphony that never missed a beat, a never-ending chorus of Brooklyn life. In the midst of it all stood Jaden Tyson. A young boy, just on the cusp of puberty, he was a small island of calm amidst the relentless chaos. The plastic bag in his hand, filled with afternoon treats, promised a sugar rush that flickered in his mind like a beacon of joy. Childhood excitement danced in Jaden's eyes as he glanced down the street, eagerly searching for the familiar silhouette of his father's black Escalade. It was more than just a car. It was a symbol of safety, of stability, the kind that only a man as powerful and legendary as Mike Tyson could provide. But today, the Escalade was nowhere in sight. The absence of its hulking form stirred a faint whisper of unease, a flicker of uncertainty that edged at the innocence of Jaden's young heart. And then, trouble appeared. A police cruiser rolled up, its engine growling like a predator, prowling the streets for its next victim. Behind the wheel sat Officer Brad Connors, his beady eyes scanning the sidewalk, looking for trouble, and today, he found it. Officer Connors' eyes scanned the street with the sharp focus of a hawk hunting its prey. His reputation in the neighborhood was well known, a cop notorious for his love of excessive force and a disturbing knack for abusing his authority. The cruiser rolled to a stop by the curb, the menacing red and blue lights flashing, casting an eerie glow over the block. With a swagger that reeked of arrogance, Connors stepped out of the vehicle, his boots striking the pavement with the force of a mailed fist slamming onto a table. "Well, well," he drawled, his smirk widening as he locked eyes on Jaden, clearly relishing in his power. Connor's eyes feasted on Jaden's vulnerability, his smirk growing wider as he saw the fear in the boy. "What do we have here?" he sneered. "A little kid, hanging out all alone?" Jaden's voice trembled, soft as a leaf in a summer breeze, but he still tried to explain. "I'm just waiting for my dad, sir," he stammered, his eyes darting nervously between the officer's malicious gaze and the empty stretch of sidewalk, still no sign of Tyson's Escalade. Connors, clearly enjoying the twisted sport of toying with Jaden's fear, leaned in closer. His voice dropped into a low, insinuating murmur, like a predator savoring its prey. He let out a laugh, malicious, cruel, and dripping with mockery. Connor's laugh echoed like the cruel cackle of a hyena, his voice laced with amusement as he prodded Jaden, pressing into his vulnerability. "Your dad, huh?" he repeated, the words dripping with mockery. "And who might that be?" Jaden's throat tightened with fear, his heart racing, but he found the strength to speak. His voice, barely above a whisper, broke through the suffocating tension. "Mike Tyson," he uttered the name. A legend. A figure that had silenced even the toughest men in their tracks. The words barely left his lips before Connors erupted in cruel laughter, his disbelief turning to mockery. "Mike Tyson," he scoffed, his smirk widening, stretching like a predator savoring the moment. With a dismissive wave of his hand, he shot Jaden's words down as if they were nothing more than a child's fantasy. "No way," he sneered. "Full-blown? You expect me to believe that?" Connors sneered, his mockery cutting through the air like a blade. Each word was sharp, aimed to shred Jaden's composure, to expose the boy's vulnerability as if it were a fresh wound, raw and bleeding. Connors' predatory instincts kicked into overdrive. With a single deliberate step, he closed the gap between them, moving with the speed and precision of a shark sensing blood in the water. Then, without warning, he lunged. His hands shot out, grabbing Jaden by the arms with the force of a bear trap snapping shut. Jaden, caught in the officer's unyielding grip, was yanked off the ground, his feet dangling helplessly above the pavement. The world seemed to tilt as his body hung in the officer's cruel clutches, his pulse hammering against his chest. Jaden dangled helplessly in midair, his voice strangled by shock and terror. "Hey!" he yelped, his protest muffled by the brutal strength of Connors. His sneakers swung aimlessly above the concrete, suspended like a twisted mobile, an eerie testament to his helplessness. His pulse thundered in his ears, each beat like a jackhammer, pounding with relentless intensity. The world around him seemed to freeze, time itself hanging in the balance. The horror of Connor's assault paralyzed everything in its wake, the energy of the street evaporating into a suffocating silence. Bystanders, caught in the whirlwind of this brutal tableau, stood motionless, frozen in place, as if the very air had thickened, stalling their every movement. Fear and indecision danced in their eyes, but no one stepped forward. The crowd stood frozen, their eyes locked in an uncomfortable dance of fear and indecision. They watched in silence, paralyzed by the cruelty unfolding before them. Connors reveled in the power he wielded over the helpless child, his sadistic glee bubbling to the surface. A malicious cackle escaped his lips, echoing down the street like the haunting cry of a hyena. "Look at this kid!" he bellowed, his finger stabbing the air at Jaden with such force it might as well have been a spear pinning the boy to the wall of public humiliation. Hanging like a little monkey. Jaden's face twisted in a painful mixture of agony and shame, the sting of humiliation coursing through his veins like fire. His body trembled, helpless against the weight of the officer's cruelty. His heart raced, each beat louder than the last as the world seemed to close in around him. Jaden's heart pounded in his chest, each beat a frantic drum that seemed to echo through the streets. His limbs strained against Connor's iron grip, struggling in vain as he was held captive. "Put me down!" Jaden shouted, his voice raw with desperation, but the words barely escaped his throat, choked by fear. Connors, his bloodlust still coursing through him, responded with a grin as cold and unforgiving as the winter winds. "Relax, kid," he sneered. "We're just having a little fun." His voice oozed menace, every word a threat. The street held its breath. The crowd, frozen in a collective state of horrified inaction, watched in silence. For Connors, this was a game, a twisted exercise in dominance, a cruel display of control. He was the predator. Jaden, the helpless prey, struggling in the officer's grip like a mouse trapped by a cat's claws. For Jaden, This was more than just a moment of cruelty. It was a public trial. A brutal test of his strength, his fortitude, and his dignity. He was the sacrificial lamb, suspended in the air, exposed to the mockery and humiliation of the crowd. Each second felt like an eternity, an unrelenting parade of shame, every heartbeat a reminder of his helplessness. The weight of it pressed down on him, suffocating him with indignity. The air itself seemed to throb with tension, heavy and thick, like a storm about to break. The collective silence of the onlookers hung over the scene like a dark, oppressive fog, as if the world itself held its breath. Then, like a thunderclap, the atmosphere shattered. The unmistakable growl of a powerful engine reverberated down the street, a deep, predatory sound that sent a jolt of hope through Jaden's veins. The sleek, dark silhouette of a Cadillac Escalade appeared at the end of the block, cutting through the silence like a predator closing in on its prey. The Cadillac Escalade appeared at the end of the street, speeding like a bullet through the chaos, cutting through the noise and confusion. Its chrome grille gleamed in the sunlight, sharp and menacing, like the fangs of a predator locking onto its prey. The tires screeched as the Escalade came to a violent halt, the sound slicing through the tension in the air. A wave of dread rippled through the crowd. They felt it, the heavy weight of what was about to happen. They knew what was coming. The door of the Escalade flew open with a force that seemed to shake the very air around them. A shockwave of energy spread through the street as out stepped the source of their fear, the embodiment of the gathering storm. Mike Tyson. His presence was like a thunderbolt, pure and unbridled fury incarnate. He strode into the scene with the force of a hurricane, his eyes blazing with the intensity of a man whose patience had finally snapped. Tyson's fury burned brighter, a raw, uncontrollable force, a man whose patience had finally snapped. For a brief, electrifying moment, the world seemed to pause. The onlookers stood frozen, as still as statues, their breaths trapped in their throats, unable to move, unable to speak. And then, as if on cue, the silence was violently shattered by Tyson's thunderous roar, a sound that shook the very foundations of the street. Moments ago, pedestrians had cowered in fear of Officer Connor's wrath, their eyes wide with terror. But now, the mood shifted. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. The murmurs pulsed in unison, a shared heartbeat that sent ripples of excitement through the crowd, igniting them with the realization of what was happening. Phones, like talismans against chaos, were raised high, capturing the drama as it unfolded, each click a testament to the rising storm of justice that Tyson was about to unleash. The unfolding drama was captured by eager clicks and flashes, as phones rose like witnesses to history. In that fleeting moment, the world seemed united by the sheer force of Tyson's presence. But Tyson? His face was a mask of cold, controlled rage, a storm held in check by the sheer power of his will. Yet his focus was unwavering, fixed on only one thing: his son. Tyson's voice, low and primal, rumbled through the air like the growl of a predator. It was a warning shot fired into the chaos, a sound that demanded attention and respect. "Let my son go." 3 simple words, but spoken with the calm assurance of a man who knew his authority would not, could not, be challenged. Connors, still lost in his twisted game, turned to face the challenger. His smirk remained, stubborn and unshaken, ready to meet the storm head-on. Connors, still dripping with arrogance, prepared to deliver a retort that would surely cut Tyson down to size. "And who the hell are you?" he sneered. But before the final syllable could even leave Connor's lips, the air seemed to crackle, charged with the raw energy of Tyson's sudden movement. It was as if the laws of nature themselves had been defied. There was no warning, no build-up, no telegraphing of intent. Tyson moved like a bolt of lightning, faster than the eye could follow. His body surged forward with explosive speed, closing the distance between him and Connors in an instant. His arm coiled like a viper, poised to strike, and then Tyson's fist detonated with brutal force, a strike that would leave its mark on the officer and on everyone who witnessed it. Tyson's fist erupted from its coiled state, detonating with the force of a tactical strike. It shot forward, hurtling toward Connor's exposed ribs like a guided missile, relentless and unforgiving. The impact was devastating. The punch stole Connor's breath in an instant, rocking his entire body as if his very soul had been knocked loose. He stumbled backward, his legs buckling beneath him, like a drunken boxer teetering on the edge of collapse. Crack! The sound of Tyson's fist landing echoed across the street, a brutal reminder of the raw, primal power Tyson possessed. It was power he had spent his entire life honing, sharpening it to lethal precision. Jaden, freed from Connor's iron grip, crashed to the pavement. His youthful limbs scrambled desperately to find purchase on the unforgiving ground as he struggled to rise. Jaden scrambled to his feet, his limbs shaking as he sought stability on the concrete. The crowd, electrified by Tyson's intervention, erupted into a chaotic chorus of exclamations. Their voices collided in a discordant symphony of shock and exhilaration, a raw reflection of the moment. Some gasped, their eyes wide with disbelief, unable to process the sudden turn of events. Others cheered, their hearts pounding with adrenaline, caught up in the thrill of the explosive justice that had just been delivered. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the energy of the crowd, united in their astonishment. Connors, his face twisted in a grotesque mixture of pain and fear, clutched at his bruised ribs, the remnants of Tyson's brutal blow still rattling through his body. His breath came in desperate wheezes as he struggled to regain control, but the damage had been done. "You just assaulted an officer," he managed to gasp, his voice strained, the words tinged with disbelief and panic. Connor's voice was strained, his breath coming in desperate gasps as he tried to find the words. But before the threat could even finish leaving his lips, Tyson's eyes locked onto him with a cold, unyielding focus. In an instant, Tyson unleashed a left hook, a punch so precise it seemed to detonate with brutal force. It collided with Connor's jaw like a wrecking ball, the sickening bam of impact reverberating through the street. Connor's head snapped back, the ferocity of the blow rocking his entire body. He crumpled to the pavement with the unceremonious thud of a felled tree, unable to stop his descent into unconsciousness. Tyson stood over him, his breathing steady, but his eyes, blazing with unbridled fury, were locked on the officer's prone form. He wasn't done yet. The primal rage that had fueled his first strike still coursed through him, raw and untamed. The primal rage inside Tyson had not yet subsided. Connors, the instigator of this chaos, would pay the price for his arrogance. Tyson's hands, balled into fists of iron, shot out and seized Connor's uniform like a grotesque handle. With the effortless strength of a seasoned prizefighter, Tyson hoisted the officer off the ground, his grip like a vice. "You think my son is a joke?" Tyson roared, his voice a thunderous wave of rage that shook the very air. "Let's see how funny this is." Connors, his eyes still glassy with shock, was now at the mercy of Tyson's wrath. The terror of his predicament crept up on him, slowly but surely, like the cold fingers of fear gripping his spine, dragging him into the reality of his own helplessness. The terror in Connor's eyes deepened as the weight of his helplessness grew, like the cold light of dawn creeping over the horizon. Tyson, his body taut with fury, unleashed another devastating blow. This time, his fist drove straight into Connor's exposed abdomen with sickening force. The impact was brutal. A violent wrenching sound erupted from Connor's throat, a desperate gasp for air as he crumpled under the blow. His body buckled, collapsing in on itself as he vomited violently onto the pavement. The sound and sight of Connor's humiliation rippled through the crowd, sending a wave of revulsion through the onlookers. It was a stark reminder of the raw brutality that had unfolded before them. The crowd, a collective beast driven by primal instincts, couldn't tear their eyes away. They were no longer just passive observers. They were caught up in the spectacle of violence, part of the savage energy that Tyson had ignited. The brutal spectacle of violence and retribution sparked an eruption in the crowd, a savage chorus of cheers, jeers, and calls for blood. The air vibrated with raw emotion, the collective tension of the street reaching its peak. One onlooker, emboldened by the adrenaline of the moment, shouted into the chaos, his voice carrying with the force of a battle cry. "That's what you get, pig!" The animosity toward law enforcement, a deep-rooted mistrust born from years of injustice, surged to the forefront of the crowd's consciousness. It fueled their cries for justice, igniting something primal in them. The cheers of the crowd became a powerful rhythmic chant that echoed through the streets, a demand for retribution that Tyson had unleashed. Connors, in a desperate attempt to salvage what little dignity he had left, trembled with effort. His body shook, his fear palpable as he tried to hold on to something, anything, to regain control. But it was clear. His time was up. In a final, futile attempt to salvage his situation, Connors weakly reached for his taser, his hand grasping for the weapon as if it were a lifeline in a stormy sea. But his move was born of desperation, not sound judgment. Before Connors could even lay a finger on the taser, Tyson, his reflexes honed to razor-sharp precision, moved in a flash. He snatched the weapon from its holster effortlessly, tossing it aside with a flick of his wrist, as though it were nothing more than an afterthought. Tyson's gaze, already burning with volcanic fury, ignited into a blazing inferno. The officer's pathetic attempt to regain control only served to fuel Tyson's rage, his body coiling with power, his anger boiling over. "Oh, you want to play with weapons?" Tyson's voice was a low growl, dripping with contempt. "Let's see how you like it when I play your little game." "Play with weapons?" Tyson snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. "Well, let's see how you like it when I play your little game, huh? Let's see how funny it is when the tables are turned." His threat hung in the air like a thundercloud, crackling with electricity, its discharge inevitable. The crowd, already tense, seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for the storm to break. Tyson's muscles, taut with barely contained aggression, coiled as he pressed the taser trigger. A torrent of electric current shot through Connor's body, snapping through his veins with brutal force. The officer's primal, visceral screams shattered the silence of the night, his body convulsing violently in response to the electrical assault. The crackling sound of electricity coursing through his body echoed like a distorted symphony, punctuated by Connor's agonized cries. As the electricity coursed through Connor's body, his muscles convulsed violently, like a puppet whose strings had been yanked with savage force. His body writhed in an agonizing, grotesque dance, each movement driven by the cruel power of the current. The crowd, their collective sense of justice and retribution momentarily sated, erupted into cackles of laughter. The sound rolled through the street, bouncing off the walls of the urban landscape like the echoes of a twisted inside joke shared by the masses. "Oh, look at him twitch!" one onlooker shouted, his voice dripping with malicious glee. "That's what you get, cop!" Another laughed uproariously, reveling in the spectacle as Connor's body jerked and spasmed, helpless against the relentless torment. Connor spasmed helplessly on the ground, his body jerking violently with each uncontrollable convulsion. The crowd, still caught in the frenzy of his humiliation, jeered and laughed, feeding off the spectacle before them. But then, through the laughter and chaos, a new sound began to infiltrate the air, a sound that cut through the thick tension like a dagger. The distant wail of sirens, shrill and urgent, grew louder, heralding the arrival of reinforcements. More officers were on their way to aid their fallen comrade. But it was too late. Tyson, his moment of retribution still ringing in the air, turned to face the source of the sirens. His gaze locked onto the towering figure of Captain Harris, whose presence seemed to command the very street. Captain Harris, an old-timer with a face carved by years of duty and the weight of command, stood frozen in place as the scene before him registered in his mind. His eyes flicked from Connor's convulsing body to Tyson's towering form, his face draining of color like a winter morning sky before the storm. He understood the implications immediately. The powder keg of public fury Tyson's actions had just ignited. The situation had spiraled far beyond anything Harris had ever anticipated. "Tyson, walk away," he said, his voice a mixture of authority and desperation. "We'll handle this." But Tyson, his muscles still tensed like coiled springs, stood unwavering, his gaze unblinking. He wasn't moving. Not yet. Tyson stood his ground, undeterred by the captain's appeal. His eyes bored into Harris with a cold, unyielding intensity, unblinking and full of rage. His voice was low, a guttural growl that rumbled through the air, sharp as a razor blade. "Yeah," Tyson growled, his tone deadly, a warning shot that hung in the air. "Well, if I ever see this bastard near my son again, I promise you, he won't be getting back up next time. You think I'm playing?" The tension in the air was so thick it could be cut with a knife, like a live wire stretched to its limit, ready to snap at any moment. Harris, his instinct for self-preservation kicking in, swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly in his throat. He understood the weight of Tyson's threat. Harris replied, his voice heavy with resignation, his shoulders slumping just slightly, as if the weight of the moment had crushed something inside him. He turned to his men, their faces a kaleidoscope of reactions, ranging from shock to barely contained anger. Harris barked his orders, his voice ringing clear through the night air, sharp and commanding. "Arrest Connors," he said, his words falling like a judge's gavel in a courtroom, final and undeniable. The crowd, holding its collective breath, gasped in unison. Their eyes widened in disbelief as the scene unfolded before them. Connors, once full of cocky arrogance, now stood reduced. His bravado had crumbled, replaced by a defeated slump as the reality of his situation sank in. Connors was dragged toward the squad car, his body offering little resistance as the cuffs clicked around his wrists, a cold and unforgiving symbol of his downfall. The sight of the once untouchable officer being reduced to a common criminal sent a ripple of satisfaction through the onlookers. It was a moment of long overdue justice, a feeling that coursed through the crowd like a cleansing wave. Jaden, his young eyes still reeling from the rapid and violent events that had unfolded, turned his gaze upwards to his father. His face was a mixture of fear, confusion, and something else. Something he couldn't quite name but felt deep within. "Dad, did you have to do all that?" he asked, his voice tinged with a quiet, uncertain wonder. Jaden's voice held a hint of reproach, but also an unmistakable wonder, the raw power and decisiveness of his father, a power that both scared and fascinated him. Tyson, his towering frame now softened by the weight of fatherhood, knelt down to meet his son's gaze. He placed his strong, calloused hands gently on Jaden's shoulders, his grip firm but full of tenderness. The fierce rage of moments ago had melted away, replaced by a softness reserved only for his boy. "Son," Tyson said, his voice deep with the weight of fatherly wisdom. "When someone tries to break you, you fight back. Always. You don't let them think they can take away your dignity. You stand up for yourself because no one else will," Tyson said, his words carrying the weight of a lifetime of hard-earned wisdom. Jaden's chin lifted with the pride that only a child who has witnessed their father's strength could feel. His fear, once overwhelming, began to dissipate, melting away like mist beneath the warmth of the morning sun. He nodded, his understanding clear in his eyes. Tyson's face softened as a smile broke through, transforming his rugged features into a visage of paternal warmth. Rising to his feet, he placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder, guiding him toward the escalade. "Let's go home," Tyson said, his voice filled with the reassurance of a safe harbor in the midst of a storm. And with that, Jaden and his father, Tyson, walked away, their figures slowly disappearing into the urban landscape like shadows in a dream. The city, its streets still reverberating with the ghostly remnants of their encounter, would never forget the events of that fateful day. It would be etched into the collective memory of Brooklyn, a story that would be retold for years to come, a tale of courage, justice, and the boundless power of a father's love. For in the end, no matter how mighty the oppressor, no force on earth could ever match the strength of a father willing to protect his child. Thank you for listening to the whole story. Have a good day.